Little Red Riding Hood was a clever and kind boy who lived in Manhattan with his mother. He liked to wear his red hooded jacket, which his grandmother had given him as a Christmas gift. His grandmother lived in Brooklyn, and Little Red Riding Hood often visited her on weekdays. One day, his mother asked him to take some medicine and soup to his grandmother, who had a fever. Little Red Riding Hood agreed and packed the items in a backpack. He took the subway to Brooklyn and walked towards his grandmother's apartment. On the way, he met a man who was wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses. He had a crooked smile and a smooth voice. He introduced himself as Mr. Wolf and said he was a mechanic who had just fixed his grandmother's car. He asked Little Red Riding Hood where he was going, and he told him about his grandmother. Mr. Wolf pretended to be surprised and said he had just left her place. He said he had a spare key to her apartment and that he had noticed that she was not feeling well. He said he had offered to take her to the hospital, but she had refused. He said he was worried about her and that he wanted to check on her again. He suggested that Little Red Riding Hood should go with him and that they could surprise his grandmother with the medicine and soup. He said he knew a shortcut to her apartment and that they could get there faster. He had an evil plan in his mind. He wanted to rob the grandmother and the little boy and then disappear. Little Red Riding Hood was curious and trusting, and he agreed to go with Mr. Wolf. He followed him to a shabby building where he said his grandmother lived. He opened the door with the key and invited Little Red Riding Hood inside. Little Red Riding Hood entered the apartment, which was dark and messy. He saw an old woman lying on the couch, covered with a blanket. She had gray hair and wrinkled skin. She looked like his grandmother, but something was wrong. He approached her cautiously and said hello. The old woman did not answer but coughed weakly. Little Red Riding Hood noticed that she had big ears, big eyes, and big teeth. He felt scared and wondered if she was really his grandmother. He asked her if she was feeling better, and she said no. She said she needed some medicine and soup, and asked him if he had brought any. Little Red Riding Hood said yes, and opened his backpack. Mr. Wolf, who had been hiding behind the door, jumped out and grabbed the backpack from Little Red Riding Hood. He laughed wickedly and said he was not a mechanic, but a scammer who had tricked many people before. He said the old woman was not his grandmother, but his partner in crime. She was wearing a wig and a mask to look like her. He said they had been waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to come so they could rob him of his belongings. He ran away with the backpack, leaving Little Red Riding Hood with the old woman. She got up from the couch and tried to catch him too. She said she wanted her share of the loot. Little Red Riding Hood was shocked and angry. He shouted for help, hoping someone would hear him. Luckily, a policeman who was passing by heard his scream. He saw Mr. Wolf running with the backpack and recognized him as a wanted criminal. He quickly ran after him and caught him before he could escape. He handcuffed Mr. Wolf and brought him back to Little Red Riding Hood. He apologized to him for what had happened and said he would take Mr. Wolf and the old woman to jail. He also said he would take him to his real grandmother's apartment and make sure she was okay. Little Red Riding Hood thanked the policeman for his help and hugged him. He was relieved that Mr. Wolf was caught and that he could not harm anyone else. He hoped that his grandmother would be happy to see him, even without the medicine and soup. He followed the policeman to his grandmother's place, where he found her waiting for him with a smile. His grandmother had heard about what had happened from the news and was glad that Little Red Riding Hood was okay. She hugged her grandson and invited him inside. They had a nice chat over tea and cookies, which his grandmother had made for him. They laughed about Mr. Wolf's stupidity and praised the policeman's courage. They agreed that they were lucky to have each other and that they loved each other very much. They lived happily ever after. The end.